Hey guys, Mike and Brad here from Office of the CISO, and we've banned gum from Brad so he won't smack throughout the entire episode.
Gum
And we're going to
advice.
try to keep his tapping at a minimum. But today we're going to talk about, frameworks and
You know,
what they are and why they're important. So stay tuned. All right, guys, so this conversation is going to be real organic. I don't have any notes regarding it, and Brad's going to kind of lead it, and I'm just going to interject wherever I can. I'm going to start with a story of a man that I interviewed once. I'm not going to give his name because I'm kind. But during the interview, I asked him specifically if he could explain what risk management framework was. And his reply was, it's a framework used to manage risk. Now, I don't bring that up to poke fun at that person, but to more so outline an overall, I don't want to call it a limitation per se, but maybe there's a gap. There's a giant gap there. Now, that person was being interviewed, so obviously in the heat of the moment, they can wig out. But more times than not, whenever you're talking to cybersecurity or information security professionals, they either can't name the various frameworks or the foundational documents that are necessary to build a quality program. And if they can, they usually can't list the why. So we're going to jump into the plethora that is. Brad is the head of our GRC department here at Office of the CISO, and there is a very good reason why. He can actually explain this stuff in detail in a manner that is understandable. So, Brad.
10-4. So the security frameworks typically take a different appreciation for security than a lot of the more technical roles do. A lot of times you'll see guys in technical roles that have been technical their entire careers, and when they get into things like security documentation, security frameworks, security controls, and things like that, their eyes tend to glaze over because it's pretty awful.
It's hard.
It's difficult.
But also all their experience is standard operating procedures
Mm-hmm.
and hard, simple policies like acceptable use policies that don't take grand scheme.
Right. And most of the time, most tacticians, most of the time, they don't make great strategists.
I'm a tactician. I'm not a horrible strategist.
No, and a lot of times the tacticians can understand the why behind a strategy. But actually creating a strategy, deploying a strategy, and turning a strategy into tactics.
Yes.
That it takes a different mindset. And honestly, so in my career, I've been a firewall admin, a network admin, server admin. I've had all the technical background. I'm educated in application development. I couldn't do it for a career.
Just enough to know we wouldn't be able to do it.
Right. I kind of wanted to round out where I was headed. I knew I was headed towards networking and firewalls, but I wanted it to include app dev in my background so that I could have a good, well-rounded background. So I've got experience in a lot of those technical areas, but when it comes to security and policy, procedure, guidelines, and that kind of thing specifically, I can almost feel a physical switch in my brain when I have to move from technical to procedural or policy-based stuff like that.
I'm glad you have that switch because I'd be lost without it.
And like sometimes I have to force the switch. Like I got to snap my brain out of policy to get into the technical side, and vice versa.
Before we dive into the various not policy sets, but the frameworks themselves.
Yeah.
Why does it tend to be the more difficult side for people to get a hold of? From my perspective, it's because it's the less cool side. You're not doing it's documentation.
No, you're right.
Paperwork.
You're right.
It's meetings. It's asking questions to people that should know the answers, but they don't understand the question when you ask it because they don't know the answer, because they just do what they need to do and move on.
Well, so some of the frameworks, and we'll get into them, but some of the frameworks take an organizational perspective, and most IT guys we're IT guys.
Role-based.
We're at that level. Like we're in the weeds. We've got our eyes on the screen with the digits and the characters and the activities that the technology is going through, things like that. We're in the weeds.
So we're like, as a firewall engineer, the only thing we care about is
what needs to talk to what.
What needs to talk to what.
Yeah.
They've given us a list, and we input it.
Yeah.
We don't think big organizational picture-wise from that perspective.
Right. And in most of the larger organizations, they have processes in place to where somebody else has already made the decision as to whether or not those communications should be allowed. So by the time you get the ticket to create the firewall policy, those decisions have already been made. You just make the decision happen.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And it's not all willy-nilly.
Well, yeah. That's what I'm getting at is a lot of the thought processes behind system development or architecture, that kind of thing, is out of the firewall admin's hands. They don't have to get it into their brains. They don't have to get it out of their brains.
They just do the needful and let it ride, man.
Yeah, they put the configuration in place to make the firewall, to make the technologies do what the business has told them they need the technologies to do.
Cool.
The kicker with cybersecurity, and I do lump this into the overall umbrella of cybersecurity, is that we've got to relate to the business and be able to let the business do what the business needs to do with the technologies in a secure fashion. Right?
So, that wonderful answer of no but.
Yeah. The asterisk beside it. Yeah, we can do this, however...
Or we shouldn't do that, but we could do this and get the same outcome in a secure manner.
Yeah. You're trying to do this. We don't need to do that. We can let you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish with a more secure mindset. Yeah.
Groovy.
Yep. So to go ahead and dive headfirst into some of the frameworks.
Let's jump into the first one and where it could be useful, I guess.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of security frameworks. There's some that I have a penchant towards, but they all tend to have a use case or something like that. The first one I'll toss out is the Cybersecurity Framework.
Now, we've heard a lot about that one because the federal government's come out and kind of pushed it on agencies and said, we're going to do this. I know Trump came out and said it. I believe Biden's reinforced it.
He probably has, yeah. And it's an easy one to push because it's a good framework.
It's a good framework.
It's a very good framework.
Why is it a good framework?
Well, so the first iteration, I think, was written in 2014. I haven't done all my research, but I think Obama's White House, it was released under Obama's White House.
Mm-hmm.
It was updated maybe in 19, but I don't remember exactly when it was updated. So the cybersecurity framework, though, its use case is kind of leaning towards incident response and the minimization of an incident making an impact on an organization.
And we find that important because it doesn't matter how good your program is, how tight and secure your organization is. It's a matter of when, not if.
Right, and it gets your organization prepped and ready to deal with an incident and to recognize what an incident is when one happens, right?
And what it takes to get back.
Yeah.
What that cost is.
Yeah. Yeah, and to minimize the dollar cost and the information loss cost, what's the word I'm going for? The face of the company, the goodwill of the company.
PR.
Sure, yeah, the
image,
the image of the organization.
I'm the marketer.
The loss of that stuff, yeah. So it helps to prepare an organization to deal with and minimize an incident when it happens. Now, that's not all it does, but it's got a heavy incident response tie-in, I guess. One of the things I don't like about it is that it is kind of focused in that area. It misses or it lacks a lot of the organizational stuff as far as documentation of or listing of systems, like the systems themselves. It doesn't require you to boundarize a system and know where the system starts and stops versus where the other system starts and stops, because it doesn't include things like authorizations, the authorization steps. Systems that have that are boundarized, or rather that are under authorization processes within an organization, need to have their boundaries clearly defined. This one is this one, and it's not this one. So the authorizing officials, when they are given the thumbs up, and we're getting into RMF and things like that. I'll get to that one in a second. But when they're authorizing the systems to operate, They need to know where the system starts and stops, that this system is not this system, and that this system is not this one, but they may intercommunicate, right?
Yeah, and systems could be like applications.
They could be
They
applications.
could do organization-wide, depending on what it uses from an ERP or whatever.
Sure. So
Why would CSF not focus on authorizations? Is it because it comes more so from a federal standpoint where the president or your CEO tells you to do and you do? Or
it's that it just lacks that authorization requirement, right?
I know all my DoD contracting, we had a general support system. We called it GSS.
Yeah.
So they had systems, they just didn't.
Well, right, but the CSF is more geared towards
The planes in the air, how do you fix it while it's flying type
well,
thing?
it intends to be broader, I guess, to cover all processes and all systems and to kind of cover everything. But in the DoD world, like the DoD specifically, their systems are massive, just massive,
Huge.
So you can't really lump everything in to one big authorization, one big thumbs up. You can't do that because they're too big. It's unwieldy. And really, what the DoD would tend to do, I would assume, is they would take their NIST 853 implementations and map those to the CSF controls, and that's how they're meeting those requirements.
Yeah,
that's how
we did a lot of that.
Yeah, that's how they're meeting the requirements of the executive orders from like Trump when he came out and pushed CSF.
Because they've been running RMF forever.
Yeah, it was. I think 53 was first published, or at least NIST was required to create that type of a granular framework like that back in 2002. That all started as a result of the September 11 attacks in the legislation that came up when I think they created DHS. FISMA came about in that whole activity. So moving on from CSF though, I've got 853 on my list next, but that's overarched kind of by the risk management framework.
Yes.
So NIST 800-37 and NIST 800-39, those are the documents, I can't remember which is which, but one describes the risk management framework and how it should work, and the other describes how the federal government should implement it. So risk management framework works through a 6 or 7 step process of, let me pull this out of my brain. Categorizing a system, selecting the system's control baseline as a result of that categorization, implementing the controls, assessing the controls, authorizing the implementation of the system, authorizing the system to operate with those implemented and assessed controls, and then monitoring the controls through the life of the system.
That's the one I know.
Yeah, monitoring.
That's the one I'm usually, that's my world, to monitor and maintain.
Yeah. Well, so the controls that we're talking about in the risk management framework, that's the NIST special publication 800-53. So that's now in revision 5. And that lays out a super granular set of security controls that can have different baselines based on the criticality of the system or the type of information that's included in the system. Typically, the baselines are low, moderate, and high. Of course, you can tailor those to your needs and to your organizational requirements. So you could have like a moderate plus some extra stuff.
I mean, like what we do for a lot of institutions of higher education is we, at least as of late, we've been categorizing them as overall low, but they have certain systems that have a higher rating based on that system use. So.
Right. And that's a way you could step up the maturity over a period of time, is to start at a low, require a low right now, and then
crawl before you walk.
Right. We'll get to the moderate, and if we need a high, we'll get to a high.
And NIST 853 is exceptional because it gives you each individual control, and then it gives you the option for modifiers based on
enhancements
and use cases.
Right. If you need stricter security controls, you can certainly add them. If you set the baseline at moderate, you can't go lower.
Right.
Right, baseline's moderate. You can't go with just a low because
This is your list of controls you have to run with.
right. You can always make it more complex, but you can't necessarily go lower. Now, that doesn't mean you have to have everything implemented day one, depending on the organization's risk tolerance. And I really like the term risk tolerance as opposed to risk appetite because we're talking about securing information resources, not
I do
business
not like
opportunity.
vegetables, but I have a tolerance for them, so I'll eat them.
So risk in vegetables. I like it. So let's see. You threw me off. I lost where I was.
Risk appetite.
Okay, so you're right. Again, not a fan of risk appetite because we're talking about protecting information assets. But when an organization doesn't have the resources to implement all of its security controls, that's where a thing called a plan of action and milestones comes in.
Our favorite document.
It is certainly a necessary document, a necessary evil.
It's useful, though. I mean,
it is, and in the real world, it never goes away.
If it goes away, you did something wrong.
Well, you're lying. Yeah.
Through your teeth.
Yeah, mainly because of things like operating system patches and application patches and things like
There's
that.
always vulnerability.
Vulnerabilities are discovered all day, every day. So the POAM is something that's gonna live throughout the entirety of the system's life.
Mm-hmm.
It'll always be there, and
that's its own document, by the way, where you actually outline known risks or threats or vulnerabilities that are on your network and your plan or action that you choose to mitigate or defer or accept said risk.
Whatever your risk responses are, whatever your allowed risk responses are for your organization, that's where those are documented. Yeah. So the risk management framework, as part of its authorization process, has a package of documents that's presented to an authorizing official. The authorizing official is intended to know everything about the system by reading those documents, right?
Yes.
Generally, they're a lot longer than somebody's going to be able to sit down on the weekend and pore over. But
it's going to put them to sleep.
It will, and it does. But the point is that, and I think I'm stealing this from Kelly Handerhan from Cybersecurity, but if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Right?
Doesn't exist.
Right.
Didn't happen.
So it's got to live in these documents, all of your security implementations and supporting artifacts proving that you're performing the security things you're saying you're doing. So that this authorization package is made up of the system security plan, the security assessment report. Possibly, I've seen some organizations include the risk assessment report.
Yeah.
I've seen them leave that out as well, though. And then the plan of action and milestones, and then any supporting artifacts that let the assessors or let the system owners prove to the assessors that the security controls are being performed like they say they are. So the authorizing official takes that huge documentation package that's often 1,000 pages or more total, and makes his decision based on the risks that are documented in the plan of action and milestones and the security implementations that are documented in the system security plan, and decides whether or not that system should be authorized to operate in their environment. I really like RMF and the NIST 853 security control catalog, mainly because it doesn't miss anything. Now, you may find some little minute controls here or there that are worded differently, that something like ISO may pick up that 53 doesn't come out and explicitly say, but I've never been able to find a control that 853 didn't cover. It just may not word it in a way that makes you go, oh, that's what it's talking about.
Now, with that being said, if you have, comment below because I'd like to hear about it. So.
Good point. I would really like to hear some, because again, I've never seen one where I couldn't go, oh, well, this really is made up of these three controls. They just call it something different than, for instance, username and password. Mm-hmm. You're not going to see a control named username and password.
Authentication or access.
Well,
control.
It's right. So it's identification and authentication. That's the family that handles like username and password. And I've talked to a guy before that was reading through 853, and he came and he sat down with me.
Redbird, it no say password, it no say user.
But that's what he was saying. He was like, it took me forever reading through this thing for it to click in my mind that it means username and password when it's saying identification and authentication. And I was like, yeah, but it's not really meaning username and password. It's meaning identification and authentication,
which
we just normally implement those as usernames and passwords.
Especially as we come up with like a bio or face ID and thumbprint stuff. It's like you're not entering a username and password. You're entering a credential of some sort.
Right.
But
Right. So if you're going to spend time in RMF and 853,
wrap your head around that.
get used to the idea of the abstract, because that's how they talk. They don't talk in technologies generally. They talk in abstract.
Because it needs to be able to be applied across multiple things.
Right.
So you just take that little box where all your thoughts are kept.
Uh-huh.
And you just throw it out the window because that box don't exist anymore.
So. And that's the idea. Like, they're trying to get security ideas to be implemented. And typically, security ideas are implemented with technologies.
Mm-hmm.
But they may also be implemented with procedures or configurations or a person or a role or a leader, things like that. I mean, like logging and auditing could be accomplished with a SIM, right? But it could also be accomplished with a room full of analysts reading every log one at a time. I mean, that's a waste of money, in my opinion.
And it's going to increase suicide rates across
IT
it
certainly
folks,
would. It certainly would. But you see what I mean? Like the concept, these things could be done. It's just they may happen differently per different organization.
Exactly.
So that was RMF. That was 853. The next
in
one
a very condensed form.
Oh my gosh, yes. I think
that's the high 10,000 foot view.
I think RMF 800-37 or 39, whichever it is that describes it, is over 150 pages itself.
Good toilet material.
853 to read. 853
Don't wipe with it.
Is that's how paper cuts happen.
Smears the document too, and you don't know what it needs.
Just leave it in PDF. Don't print it out. 53 is probably 400 to 500 pages. Both of those I've read almost in their entirety, but 53 I have not read all of its offshoots. Like a lot of the controls will have
appendices or...
Yeah, like the controls will have a discussion section. I forget what they call it in Rev 5.
That's where the magic happens.
Yeah, well, that's how they kind of get the idea across to you what they're talking about. And so they'll also have a link to supporting guidelines and other things like that. I haven't read all those offshoots because there's 20,000 pages of material to cover. But what I've found is reading these things, and I'm going to get off of 53 in just a second, I promise. But I've found that reading these things...
She's done, Brad. Get off of her.
Shoot her! I've found that reading all these documents, and sometimes you got to read them a few times, but you're putting pieces in place in your mind of this overall picture. And the more pieces you're able to define, the clearer the picture gets.
Hopefully.
Yeah. And that's...
I've seen people that they've read it over and over again, and it just does not click, and they end up in a... I don't want to say that they go crazy, but it pisses them off.
Dude, it'll drive you. Yeah, it'll drive you crazy. It'll drive you crazy. And there's a level of aptitude to it also that you've got to have to be able to understand the abstract and turn the abstract into whatever the tangible form of abstract would be.
Oh yeah.
I guess it'd be turn the abstract into something tangible. Turn the strategy into tactics. Yeah. Anyway, so moving on from my favorite framework, 53, to the NIST 800-171. So this framework is kind of an LE version of 53. You know what I mean? Like
light edition?
Yeah. It's like they took 53.
Short and sweet.
It'll take the 53 control and it'll kind of condense it down into like an actionable couple of sentences. A lot.
I always chalked it up as it was the starter box. Something's better than nothing. At least get them on the right path.
Yeah. It's pretty granular too. Like it's more granular than CSF, I think.
Everything is.
But 171 is geared towards controlled unclassified data. Still federal data, but controlled unclassified so that federal agencies can contract out some IT services to some folks and it won't bury those organizations to develop their security program.
You think they kept CSF so bland and so simple because of the people that will be implementing it? Not to slam the DoD, but our recruiting requirements have gone down as of late.
No, I think when the first iteration of CSF, I think they put it out and they had good intentions and
they weren't ready.
It was kind of a starting point. And the first iteration was kind of, I don't know, it lacked some things in my opinion. The second iteration, the second iteration's better. It's better. It's got some granularity to it that's useful.
It's Terminator 2 versus Terminator. Terminator 2 was better.
Was that the T-1000?
That's the one with Robert Patrick's the liquid one.
Yeah. And so 800-171 is kind of like, it's not better. It's just, it's a bit easier, but it's still pretty granular. Like there's a lot to do in an 800-171 requirement. There
is, but they do a fantastic job explaining it.
Yeah.
If you're a policy person.
Right. 171 is a lot easier to read than 53. And I don't remember its page length. It's in the tens of pages versus the 400. It's a lot easier to consume than 53.
You can consume it multiple times too and kind of put your head around it.
And honestly, man, it may be something if you're trying to study this stuff and get it into your head, it may be a starting point or a stepping stone towards 53.
It's what I started with.
171?
Yeah, going from whenever I met you and you were like, hey, you need to read these publications, I threw out all of the ones that were long as hell because I was a firewall engineer and a network architect. Right. I didn't care, but I needed to wrap my head around things in order to progress and get better at what we do in general. I started with 171 because it was actually consumable in a manner to where I could read it, ponder it, read it again based on those ponderings and actually mature and kind of flow forward. So,
and I get that there's something to say for a document like that kind of has bookends,
training wheels.
Yeah, I think the concept of it being consumable is a good way to put that. But there is a starting point and a stopping point to it, whereas NIST and all of its resultant documents like the supporting docs,
forever ongoing.
Oh my gosh, it's never ending. Yeah.
I remember that movie, The Never-Ending Story.
I was about to say something about Atreyu, yeah.
Good old Atreyu. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so 800-171, I think, would be useful to an organization that plans on getting into federal subcontracting, but not necessarily DoD.
Yeah.
I don't. There is some DoD data that you could intake into a system that's not necessarily 100% FISMA compliant. But I don't know. It'd be useful in that kind of a scenario. It may be a useful starting point for somebody that's looking long term to get into federal contracting and the bigger Fed agencies. So there's one NIST publication that I like for small organizations. This isn't one that any of the federal agencies adhere to, but NIST put it out to kind of give solid basics to an organization. They can hit a lot of the high points. So this one is NIST Interagency Report 7621. I forget the title of it, but that's the publication number. But
I like how you remember the robot version of it instead of the actual layman.
Yeah, what it actually means. Yeah, but so that framework it really hits the high points. It talks about you need a firewall, blatantly you need a firewall.
Or security.
Well, right,
or segmentation in general.
So 53 would call it boundary protection, and they would mean firewall, IPS.
See, I've evolved to the point where I have trouble.
Right. Separating.
I've gotten to that point, which means Brad's like the big floating brain in the sky.
Right, until it pops.
Just like that China balloon.
Right.
Too soon?
No, right on time. 7621, it lays out fundamentals for an organization that can adopt it really quickly, and honestly, they probably already have technologies that are meeting the requirements of 7621.
Just from standard approach,
right? From a best practice concept. Everybody needs AV or anti-malware on their devices. Everybody. So it lists out those things that to not be dumb in today's world, you need to do this list of things. And it's quick and easy. I don't know. Again, tens of pages versus 1,000, but it's real easy to come up with a one pager of the list of things you need to do to kind of lock your environment
kind of like the
down.
CIS top 20 or top 18 or whatever they call it now.
Yeah, it's top 20 still, but even the top 20 will take a concept and break it out into a bunch of different controls. But this doesn't do that at all. This is like 20 things you do, and that's where it stops. Get a firewall, get endpoint protection, get a spam phishing gateway.
If you're a security company, you could pretty much build your entire package around that then.
You could, and you could help a lot of smaller organizations.
On the cheap?
Yeah.
You know, because security should be affordable.
And doable, yeah.
And doable.
Yeah. So at the moment, that's what I'm wrapping up my NIST section of the frameworks that
How many
I'm a
sections
fan
you
of.
got?
Only like there's another one that just
Another
kind
one.
of breaks it out into several others that I think are useful. And I've got on the list, I've got ISO 27000 series.
Oh, yeah.
And
I always thought those were more organizational for like process
and they are, you have to pay for them though.
those audits are not cheap.
No, but like to get the
certification.
control set.
Yeah.
No, to get the control set, you have to pay for it. To
Oh,
be
yeah,
able to
yeah.
use it. Which too, CIS Top 20. If you didn't know, Center for Internet Security, if you're a for-profit organization, they make you pay them to use that framework, which is fine. They developed it. They're a nonprofit, also an amazing organization, but they got bills to pay
That seems hokey.
as well. So
Get that federal funded.
I know, but not all of them are federal funded. Just the MSI.
Hmm.
But so the CIS Top 20, I forgot its major, how it's broken up, its major points it is broken into.
It's like first thing you do is hardware inventory.
Right, assets.
Second thing you do is software
inventory. Know what you got. When that's a brilliant first step too, I think. But
Most organizations can't answer those two questions.
I know, but it'll take that that concept of an asset inventory and break it into 10 sub controls of like have a place to put it, have a baseline configuration for each one of them. I don't know what else it breaks it into. That one I'm not as familiar with as 53.
It's beneath him.
I know the people personally that developed it, and they're awesome people. They do really good work.
They should give it away for free.
And you know, when I met with one of them one time, and I made a mistake. I didn't badmouth the top 20, but
He talked smack.
I did talk
about
smack
their
to
stuff
the dude
in front of them.
And
It's like when you're dogging some female and you find out it's the guy you're talking to, sister. I've been there.
So I won't name the dude, but
He is sorry.
yeah, CIS dude, if you do watch this ever one day, I do apologize for that because I was complaining about it not including an SDLC. Right.
God,
So
how are you missing it?
right. I mean, it's a solid security framework. I get the point of needing an SDLC.
I mean, a SDLC is kind of critical for a.
For a systems-based authorization process, yes. But if you have an environment that's up and
Oh,
operational,
that's what set you off. Okay,
right.
I
Well-
agree with you.
Well, because like you have these things, but you don't have anybody in that whole process that can look at it and go, yeah, that's good enough. Right?
That'll do.
Right. I like the idea of having leadership look at all the crap that's gone into securing their system and go, okay, that's good enough for today. But these other frameworks, the only one that really has that is 53 RMF. None of the
Brad's
others
baby.
do. Yeah,
Brad's baby.
but again, that's one of the reasons I love it. Is it's super granular, covers everything.
If you ever see 853 walking around as a human being, it's going to be a bearded man with a plaid shirt.
Always a plaid shirt.
Always a plaid shirt.
Let's see. So the next one I wanted to bring up was PCI DSS, and it's almost always required as part of using credit cards, the payment card industry.
Hence the name PCI.
Yeah, it's a really good one, and it's also similar to 7621, where it lays out a list of do these things, and then you're pretty good off. You can always do more, but you got to hit these things.
Yeah, and we work with those a lot.
Yeah.
We get called in a lot post cleanup to help resolve things, or just to help them make sure that they're compliant. That way, when they get audited against Visa or MasterCard or whoever, they're in line.
They can continue to use
Visa and MasterCard
right,
and whatever.
right, and not have to go back to cash. Yeah,
Because who has cash these days?
right.
Unless you're at the strip club.
But
you
you
don't
know,
need it.
which oddly enough, I don't carry cash.
You don't go to
Like,
strip clubs.
Well, but I don't go to strip clubs, but Like, I
That'd
don't
be
know.
a good place to minister.
All
Brad.
the other
You go where
goofy
the
stuff.
sinners are.
Yeah, but there's a degree. We can talk about that. There's a degree of dragging me into the feces. Anyway, so PCI is a good framework. Of course, it deals with payment card industry. The next one I wanted to touch on real quick is HIPAA. I don't like HIPAA.
Everybody hates HIPAA.
I hate HIPAA. I'll say useless. But
Brad used to work for a major organization that required HIPAA.
It was pretty heavy HIPAA.
All HIPAA.
It was a lot of HIPAA. But when I say useless, I don't mean useless. I just mean it's too vague. But the purpose of it being vague is
So
to
you
let
can
people
apply it.
skirt around it.
That doctor didn't know what that meant.
Well, so the Office of Civil Rights is who enforces HIPAA, right? If something happens, if an incident happens and an organization loses a bunch of patient data, Office of Civil Rights will show up and audit that organization, but not per the HIPAA security requirements because they're
vague.
Yeah. They show up and do an 853 assessment of your organization and then give you this massive workload of documentation, follow-up and things that you need to do now as an organization. So if you fail HIPAA, they're gonna show up and dump 853 on you and make you do that.
Which means you should do 853 from the get-go and avoid the HIPAA portion.
Lord.
Just have the HIPAA enhancements.
It's got good. So NIST came out with a HIPAA implementation guideline, 800-66, I believe. I got to verify. I'm sorry.
Well, I always say it was good initiative, bad judgment. Like you see that they're trying, but they didn't deploy it right, or they didn't write it right.
Yeah. So it's NIST 800-66. It's currently in Rev 2, and it takes the HIPAA statements, which are again really really vague, and it puts them in solid black and white terms. If your requirement is to do this, then what this means is step. Do every of the things.
Do the needful.
Yeah, so I like 800-66 again because it's a NIST publication and it's not a legislated piece of nonsense that could have been written a lot better.
Like HIPAA?
Like HIPAA. Exactly like HIPAA. And I think they've updated it a few times since I think it was released in '96, and they've updated it a few times since then. But I don't know.
They're polishing the turd, man.
It is. They kind of need to toss it and come up with something better. Maybe
they already did. 853.
So and of course it all depends on who the law applies to, and the laws will tell you who the requirements apply to. FSMA applies to all the federal agencies, which is why Office of Civil Rights shows up with that as their base document for audits. Anyway, not a big HIPAA fan. So I'll move on to the next one, which is the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that what that stands for? Gramm-Leach?
Gramm-Leach-Bliley.
Okay.
No,
Gramm-Leach-Bliley. I was who bleached
like,
didn't sound that.
I was saying, I'm like, that doesn't
right.
fit. We always reference that one as just straight up GLBA.
Yeah.
And it's because people go, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, Gramm-Leaky-Bliley, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, and no one gets it right, including us apparently, because we just
Gramm-Leach bleach, yeah, like we're doing laundry. So GLBA is similar to HIPAA in that it has somewhat of a short list of requirements, but they're much more pointed.
It's not a polished turd?
No.
It's much better?
No, and it did just get updated at the end of 21, I believe.
It
was
did.
Supposed to be implemented by December of 22, but then they just punted that back to June of 23.
We've had some things come across our desk as of late because a lot of people that we help with audits and assessments and whatnot have to be compliant with it. So we're ramping up our staff to be able to support that need. So. Right.
And so one of the things about HIPAA is it's pretty clear on who it applies to, people that deal with health information.
Right.
And it's specific to like doctors or covered entities. It defines covered entities very well.
GLBA, not so much.
GLBA, it's not as known. Like it's not as broad spread as HIPAA as far as who it applies to.
I mean, the only higher learning seems to be the ones that know for a fact it applies to
Oh
them,
yeah, it
and they
certainly
jump on
applies, right? But it's because it deals with financials and loans.
Mm-hmm.
Like when an organization deals with a loan, they almost certainly have GLBA as a legislated requirement.
Yep.
So that applies to financial organizations that do student loans. It applies to mortgage organizations that loan for homes.
Countrywide.
Yeah.
Wells Fargo.
It also applies to the folks that do the appraisals because they get that loan information as part of their appraisal process.
Oh, so the folks that are actually checking on the house or checking on a commercial building?
Yeah. Yeah, but like for valuation of the commercial building. The folks that give you the appraisal of the property, telling you how much it's worth. So let's see, where do we leave off? So it also
GLBA.
It also GLBA also applies to the people that appraise the value of homes and commercial buildings because they get the loan information as part of that.
So they have the financial data on the person in some fashion.
Right.
It might not be as in depth, but it's enough to matter.
Yeah. And one that surprised me, and it surprised me because it's named so clearly in the law, is car dealerships. Right?
Yeah, because they're doing car loans.
Right.
They're appraising trade-ins and this that.
Yep. So it directly applies.
Dude, none of them are doing it.
I know.
None of them.
I know. That's what I mean. It's gonna catch them off guard one day. And I heard somebody say that it's likely that, like a car dealership specifically, it will rely on like Ford for its security requirements. But I don't think that's the case, man, because most of these dealerships are locally owned or they're owned by individuals. They buy the cars from the manufacturers. The manufacturers really don't have anything to say to them except MSRP, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if they could claim that. So it's something that these guys need to be aware of, that the federal government, I don't think they're going to crack down on it necessarily, but if something happens and you lose a lot of customer data, you get hit by a ransomware attack, the feds aren't going to help you any if you weren't doing what they said to do.
I mean, since when does the feds help anyways?
You know, they did shoot that balloon.
After it scoped out the entire U.S.
Right. But it ain't like we didn't have satellites if they're doing that for them anyway.
We accomplished. That's what that dude looks like when he's at the podium. That's a clinching thing that dementia people. Never mind.
I don't know who you're talking about.
Biden.
Oh, is that what he did?
He does that all the
I
time.
don't watch that dude, man.
Well, some of them.
Yeah, he does kind of sound like a dude in a Pentecostal church. Not that there's anything wrong with that. If you have
to get a whole bunch of hate comments from
right,
Pentecostals.
Right. That's fine. Pentecostals are there too. So the one I'll just throw out here real quick and then skip over to SOC is ISO 27001. We brought that up a minute ago. It's a pretty granular set of security controls as well.
It's expensive.
Yeah, it's expensive to get. It's expensive to audit, and typically I see it more associated with European entities and less American. I don't see a lot of domestic organizations implementing ISO requirements, but I do see like worldwide companies will implement them just because it tends to apply overseas.
Usually multinational, yeah.
Yeah. And that's one that I'm not terribly familiar with. Again, just because I'm such a 53 fan that I think 53 covers it all. So I don't see the need.
53 gets the rubber stamp from you for everything.
It does, man. It does. It's beautiful.
All right, now bringing up the rear.
Yeah, kind of bringing up the rear is one that's more an assessment framework and less a framework you could build your security program
You're talking like
off
SOC
of.
Type 1, Type 2?
Yeah. So the SOC 2 specifically. So the SOC 1 audit is financially focused, but it will have a twinge of IT to it. SOC 2 tends to focus on the security implementations as far as providing IT services to other organizations. The Type 1 is a snapshot in time. Type 2 covers the course of a year, I believe. I think it's just a year.
The past year.
Yeah, they take the moment in time that the audit happens, and they look back a year to see if you've been performing these. You're
doing what you say you're doing.
Yeah, those words. Yeah, it's a good assessment framework. It's a little fluid, in my opinion. It's not as hard lined as, say, like a low, mod, high. When your baseline is set, you can get in the room with the auditor and say, "I really want you to focus this audit on." Confidentiality and security, whatever their phrasing is. And the auditor can lop off the other stuff and just focus on those things. So then you can say, I have my SOC 2 Type 2, and you passed it with, colors.
Those audits are not cheap either, though.
No, they're really not. But
we're in the wrong business.
But that's part of what I mean is you put a lot of resources into it, and they can hone it in on the things that you're doing really well and ignore the other stuff, but you still have the SOC 2 Type 2 report that you can hand over to your clients, and most of the time they don't read it. They just go, okay, you got your SOC 2 Type 2, cool.
I've never seen someone actually read it, now that you mention it.
I know.
Like data centers and everything, they're like, we're SOC 2 Type 2 certified.
Yeah.
We're like, cool.
Right. Almost everybody takes it and tosses it to the shelf.
That checks their box. Man.
Right. Now, I'll take it and I'll go through it and find the parts that can align with 53.
He's that guy.
And then I'll use those in a security program for say, a client. I'll use those answers, but they're always vague. They never give definitive specifics.
That's how you pass those tests.
Yeah. I mean, they verify things. The auditors verify things, but it never lands in the end report.
Mm-mm.
Those details never end up in the report. So I can't take them and say, well, the data center has whatever camera company watching so-and-so areas 24/7. They just say they've got cameras and they watch them. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much the main ones I wanted to talk through, which I know I did a lot of talking.
That was 47 minutes of...
Holy cow, for real?
Baptism...
by fire.
By fire.
Security frameworks go.
The InfoSec framework guru.
Yeah. So, and I guess to wrap it up, if you can do 53, do 53.
It's going to answer all your questions anyways. It's going to help you. It maps to everything.
It does map to everything. 7621 is a really good place to start. And heads up to folks that deal with loans because GLBA is coming. And
I mean, it's been here. You should have been doing it.
Right.
But if you didn't know, let's say your head was under a rock.
Let's say.
Or up your... Never mind. You need to get with it.
Or under a rock. Yeah. Anyway, that's all I've got. Did you want to close this out?
Jesus Christ, guys. There is a lot going on. So frameworks, there's good ones, there's bad ones, at least from our perspective. They have different use cases, some of which are good, some of which are bad. At the end of the day, do what Brad Bird does. Stick with 853, map it to everything else. If you have questions or concerns or comments about our comments, please don't hesitate. Opinions. Or differing opinions. Yeah. Don't hesitate to post them in the comments below because we like the engagement and the interaction. I almost had a stroke a second ago trying to say that. As always, if you like the video, hit the like button. If you want the hour of your life back, hit the dislike button. You're not going to get it back, but at least you might have learned something. And as always, hit subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, just remember security is achievable.